The first light of dawn rises over a frozen valley in the Middle Pleistocene, nearly 400,000 years ago. Mist clings to the ground, drifting around ancient trees that have stood longer than any human memory. In the distance, the silhouettes of giant Ice Age creatures move through the haze. Woolly rhinoceroses scrape frost from the earth. Cave bears lumber back toward their dens, and enormous elk lift antlers as wide as branches. This world feels familiar yet profoundly alien, a version of Earth untouched by cities, technology, or the things we now consider human. But in this ancient landscape, something extraordinary is happening. We are not alone. This is the age of many humanities. Neanderthals navigate the cold forests of Europe. Denisovans roam the high plateaus of Asia. Homo erectus, the great pioneers of our lineage, still survive in distant regions. And in Africa, the earliest ancestors of Homo sapiens are beginning to take shape. Different human species, each with their own strengths, their own cultures, their own ways of understanding the world. And so, a single question arises. What really happened when these different humans met one another? Was it coexistence, peaceful exchange, or something far more complicated? The simple story most of us learned, the one about a clean evolutionary progression, cannot explain the archaeological puzzles and genetic traces left behind. The record suggests something deeper, something far less comfortable. In this journey, we will explore the evidence that challenges our assumptions, from mysterious fossils and ancient DNA to myths that may echo memories of long-lost human relatives. And as we look closer, we may discover that the story of our origins is not just about survival, but about what it truly means to be human. As we step deeper into this ancient world, we enter the Middle Pleistocene, an era that acted almost like nature's laboratory. It was a time of branching paths, when a single ancestral population began to divide into separate human species. From a common root, 3 major lineages emerged. One group moved into Europe and gradually became the Neanderthals, powerful humans built for the cold. Another spread across Asia and evolved into the mysterious Denisovans, a lineage known today mostly through DNA. The third remained in Africa, slowly developing the traits that would one day define Homo sapiens. These were not primitive versions of one destiny, but parallel experiments in what it meant to be human. The environment around them was constantly shifting. Glaciers advanced and retreated like slow-moving walls of ice. Forests of tall pines rose and fell with each climate cycle. Wide grasslands stretched across regions that are now cities and farmland. Herds of mammoths and giant elk migrated across the continent, and every human species depended on these migrations for food and survival. Each shift in climate redrew the borders of their world, pushing populations together, then pulling them apart. In this landscape, each human species developed its own strengths. The Neanderthals were incredibly strong with robust limbs and large brains. They crafted complex tools, mixed adhesives from natural materials, and likely understood fire in ways more advanced than once believed. The Denisovans adapted to high altitudes that modern humans struggle to survive, leaving behind genes that still help people living on the Tibetan plateau. Homo erectus, older than the others, had mastered the use of fire and carried it across continents. Meanwhile, early Homo sapiens were forming flexible social structures and creating wide networks that connected distant groups. They traded materials, shared ideas, and adapted quickly to changing environments. Communication became a major advantage. While all human species had some form of vocal ability, early Homo sapiens may have developed more complex language that strengthened cooperation across larger groups. This ability to connect, to coordinate, and to innovate together allowed them to move into new territories with confidence. And as these groups expanded, the distances between them shrank. Territories overlapped, hunting grounds intersected, paths crossed more often. Climate change, shifting resources, and growing populations pushed different humans into direct contact. And with each encounter, a new question emerged, one that would shape the future of every species involved. What happens when more than one kind of human shares the same world? As we begin to examine the archaeological trail left behind by these ancient humans, the story becomes darker, more complicated, and far less peaceful than we once imagined. Some of the earliest clues come from deep beneath the ground, in places where time has sealed away events that no one alive witnessed. One of the most haunting of these places lies in northern Spain, in a cavern known as Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones. Here, the remains of nearly 30 early humans were found piled at the bottom of a vertical shaft. Among them was a skull marked by 2 nearly identical fractures on the forehead. Modern forensic analysis suggests these wounds were delivered by the same weapon in 2 separate blows. It is one of the oldest pieces of evidence of intentional killing in human history. Whether it was conflict within a group or a confrontation between different human populations, the message is clear: violence existed long before modern humans arrived. Another clue appears thousands of miles away, in the rugged Zagros Mountains of Iraq. In Shanidar Cave, the skeleton known as Shanidar III reveals a penetrating wound to the ribs. The angle and depth of the injury match a lightweight projectile weapon, something Neanderthals themselves did not typically use. Early Homo sapiens, however, did. The weapon that struck him may have been thrown from a distance, suggesting a tense encounter between 2 human species who were competing for the same territory. These fragments of violence are only part of the picture. Across Europe and Asia, caves show a striking pattern. Layers of Neanderthal occupation suddenly replaced by layers belonging to Homo sapiens, with no sign of long-term sharing of space. It is as if one population stepped aside or was pushed aside as another arrived. Even their toolkits tell a similar story. Neanderthals used strong, close combat spears, while Homo sapiens developed projectiles that allowed them to hunt and fight from safer distances. In a world where every edge mattered, this was not a small advantage, and the mysteries go even deeper. Genetic studies reveal that modern humans carry traces of Neanderthals and Denisovans, yet the amount is surprisingly small. At the same time, populations in West Africa carry DNA from an entirely unknown ghost species, a human lineage we have never seen in the fossil record. These genetic signatures hint at brief encounters, limited interbreeding, and populations that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. All of it points toward a world where different humans met not just as neighbors, but as rivals living on a rapidly changing planet. And in the echoes of that rivalry, we find the first hints of stories that would later become myths. As we move from the physical evidence into the realm of memory, a surprising pattern begins to appear. Across the world, in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years, there are stories of beings who were almost human, yet not quite like us. These myths are often dismissed as imagination, but when viewed through the lens of archaeology and genetics, they take on a new weight. It is possible that they preserve echoes of encounters between Homo sapiens and other human species long after those species disappeared from the fossil record. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, local people tell old stories of the Ebu Gogo, small forest dwellers who moved quietly through the night and spoke in murmurs. For generations, these tales were considered folklore, until the discovery of Homo florescensis revealed a tiny human species that lived in the same region deep into the late Pleistocene. The similarities between myth and fossil are difficult to ignore. In the Himalayas, stories of the Yeti describe a powerful, ancient being living high in the mountains. The regions where these tales originate overlap with areas where Denisovan DNA is most concentrated today. In Australia, Aboriginal groups speak of the Junjudi, small forest beings who existed long before modern humans. Their stories mirror discoveries of ancient lineages whose DNA survives in Aboriginal populations, including traces of a mysterious species we still have not identified. Even far out in Micronesia, people on the island of Palau share stories of tiny humans called the Teriot. When archaeologists began excavating deep caves there, they discovered unusually small-bodied ancient people whose remains suggest yet another branch of humanity. What makes these stories truly remarkable is how often they align with scientific discoveries made thousands of years later. Myth and archaeology appear to be telling parallel stories, each filling gaps left by the other. These legends hint that ancient humans may have carried memories of encounters with other human species into the stories they passed down through generations. And these memories open the door to a larger question, one that shifts us from folklore back into science. If so many humans once walked the earth together, what ultimately determined who survived and who vanished? When scientists try to explain why so many human species vanished after encountering Homo sapiens, three major theories usually rise to the surface. The first suggests that our ancestors simply outperformed their cousins through better tools, broader diets, and more flexible behavior. According to this view, no violence was needed. Homo sapiens spread across the world the way an adaptable species naturally does, slowly absorbing or displacing others without confrontation. But this explanation struggles with one undeniable fact. The archaeological record rarely shows gradual blending. Instead, we see sharp transitions, as if one population replaced another in a short span of time. The second theory points to climate change. Glacial cycles transformed entire continents, shrinking forests, drying grasslands, and pushing animals into new territories. Some human species, especially those built for cold environments like the Neanderthals, may have suffered when temperatures shifted too quickly. Yet this view has its own weaknesses. These species had survived multiple climate swings before. What changed during the period when Homo sapiens arrived? The third theory, and the most controversial, proposes active competition. Not necessarily war in the modern sense, but systematic pressure, territorial exclusion, resource monopolization, faster reproduction, more efficient cooperation, a kind of evolutionary competition that played out over thousands of years. And when we combine all three theories, a clearer picture emerges. Modern research uses ecological niche modeling to simulate how ancient populations might have competed for space and food. These models show that when two similar species occupy overlapping environments, even small advantages in technology or social behavior can create runaway displacement. New genetic studies strengthen this idea. For example, certain Neanderthal variants such as the PISO1 gene may have caused pregnancy complications when mixed with Homo sapiens DNA, reducing hybrid survival. The result is exactly what we see today. Limited interbreeding despite long periods of overlap. Climate change created pressure. Homo sapiens added speed, coordination, and flexibility. And once these forces combined, other human species were pushed into smaller and smaller refuges until their populations could no longer sustain themselves. All of this leads us toward the heart of the story, the part that carries both scientific weight and philosophical depth. What truly happened in the final chapters of humanity's shared past. As we reach the final stage of this ancient story, a pattern begins to emerge with unmistakable clarity. Wherever Homo sapiens arrived, other human species eventually disappeared. Not immediately, not through a single event, but through a long chain of pressures that gradually tilted the balance. Our ancestors brought something new into the world, a combination of traits that amplified each other in ways no other human lineage could match. One of these traits was social complexity. Early Homo sapiens formed connected networks that stretched across vast distances. Ideas, tools, and survival strategies could travel far beyond a single tribe. When a new hunting method or tool design emerged, it did not stay local. It spread, carried by stories, relationships, and shared purpose. This meant that innovation was not only created, it was multiplied. Another advantage was population size. Genetic studies show that Homo sapiens maintained larger breeding populations compared to Neanderthals or Denisovans. In evolutionary terms, numbers matter. A species with more individuals can recover faster from losses, adapt more quickly to new environments, and maintain stronger genetic health. Over the long arc of time, demographics alone can become a silent but overwhelming force. Technological innovation added yet another layer. Projectile weapons allowed sapiens to hunt dangerous animals with less risk and defend territory more effectively. Fire was used not just for warmth, but to reshape landscapes, opening forests into grasslands and expanding resources. These small edges, when sustained over generations, reshaped the world. But the most profound change happened inside the mind. Homo sapiens developed symbolic thinking, complex language, and the ability to imagine events that had not yet happened. This foresight allowed coordinated planning, shared myths, and collective goals that bound groups together. In a world of shifting climate and scarce resources, this kind of cooperation was an extraordinary advantage. And yet, with every advantage gained, something else was lost. As Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other unknown lineages disappeared, the planet lost entire ways of thinking, different forms of intelligence, and perspectives that will never be recovered. The extinction of these species was not just biological, it was cognitive. A whole spectrum of human possibility vanished, leaving only one branch of the family tree standing. Their disappearance forces us to confront a deeper question. If our ancestors survived because they were the most adaptable, what responsibilities do we carry now as the last humans on Earth? As we step back from this long journey through deep time, the full shape of the story finally comes into view. The world that once held many kinds of humans slowly narrowed until only one remained, not because we were destined to win, and not because the others were destined to fade, but because evolution placed us in a moment where our particular strengths, cooperation, imagination, adaptability aligned with the challenges of a changing planet. Our ancestors did not walk the earth as villains or conquerors. They simply used the tools they had, just as every species does when survival is at stake. But understanding this past changes how we see ourselves today. We are the final branch of a family tree that was once rich and diverse. The intelligence we carry is not the only form that could have existed. Somewhere in those vanished lineages were minds that thought differently, felt differently, and understood the world in ways that are now lost forever. Their disappearance reminds us that dominance is fragile and that survival carries responsibility. As the last humans on Earth, we inherit not just the victories of our ancestors but the weight of their choices. The same abilities that once helped us outcompete other human species now give us the power to shape the planet, protect life, and build a future worthy of all who came before us. The question is no longer how we survived, but how we choose to live now. If this journey reshaped the way you think about human nature, I'd love to hear your thoughts, share your reflections, and stay with us as we continue exploring the hidden chapters of our shared human story.